Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
It's another edition of the MMA Outsiders. That's Zain Bando. I am Tom Albano. As always, Zain, a lot of news that we got to break down. I was entering this week, Zain, originally thinking that we would be talking a lot of in the cage kind of stuff, but the stuff in the cage was kind of either surprising or disappointing. There was no real in between on that one. A lot of developments happening outside the cage.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show that almost every single week you don't know what can happen in this crazy sport. In some weeks, you could have a week with a lot of hype and a lot of build and a lot of intrigue, and it just doesn't come to fruition. We're going to talk about why we feel that way in just a little bit and so much more. But before we do, make sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to share the MMA Outsiders across social media and of course, follow us at MMA Outsiders ETB and be sure to hit the notification bell. That way you don't miss anything related to the MMA Outsiders or anything on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Again, for those of you who are new or who are returning, my name is Zain Bando. I am a staff writer at BJPen.com and the newest addition to the MMA Knockout team at Fan Nation. So I'm very excited. I just started with them a couple of days ago, so I'm glad to be a part of yet another MMA writing team, so that should be really fun. And then, of course, to my left, my longtime co-host, Tom Albano, still kicking it as a contributor with Fansided MMA and still doing excellent work for the PFL website. Back to your question or back to your statement rather as to where we originally started this conversation. Yeah, I mean that's going to happen sometimes in combat sports where you're going to get weeks where you had a lot of anticipation and a lot of just build up and excitement and intrigue, and it just really didn't feel that way this week. Obviously, with Bellator 300, that took place over the weekend in San Diego, and then UFC Vegas 80, which arguably was a more entertaining card than its fellow counterpart. But speaking of the UFC, we have to start with the biggest news of the week, which is that Conor McGregor is officially back, or so it appears. He submitted his paperwork to re-enter the USADA testing pool. Finally, we've been yelling into our respective microphones for the last several months, asking ourselves what the hell is going on with the Irishman. It seems like we have some answers now, which could very well set up UFC 300. That's right, UFC 300, projected to take place in April in Las Vegas. The highly anticipated coaches fight, Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler, probably at 170 pounds. Tom, what do you make of this news? Are you already counting down the days to a potential UFC 300 pay-per-view? How do you feel about this?
I think the word is relief because we've been sitting here, as you said, yelling into the abyss about Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler and like when this fight is going to happen. And I think that kind of something we've alluded to in previous weeks, and that UFC 300, April 2024, when you just spent a whole summer with Tough and now this fight's not going to take place until April, when it's about a month or two away from the 1-year anniversary to the start of that Tough season, I think is a little ridiculous. At the same time, it kind of makes sense that UFC 300, you're going to want a big star like a Conor McGregor as part of it. Then I think I've developed a little theory here as to what maybe had happened. Because we did see a social media post from Conor before these events, before these news stories about him with the paperwork went out. Conor did post to social media, I think it was to Instagram first, saying that he had submitted whatever he needed to submitted to Jeff Nowitzki, aka the Golden Snitch, about re-entering the USADA testing pool. So I was a little skeptical on that end, and then seeing all these reports that he really has submitted paperwork, Dana White confirming he has submitted the paperwork, he could re-enter the pool some point this week. My theory, Zan, is they were trying to get the USADA exemption. And I think Dana and Conor and company realize now that if they haven't been able to get the USADA exemption, then it needed to happen this week. So that way, either April 13th or April 20th, when we were discussing potential UFC 300 dates, Conor could get into the cage and fight. I think they've realized that basically their time is up. And so Conor's just going to have to go through the 6 months like everybody else.
Yeah, and from a business perspective, it sucks because we were anticipating UFC 296, the end of the year. Like, this is going to be the perfect bookend year to a pay-per-view schedule that I don't know about you, Tom, but this has been one of the single best years of just unbelievable pay-per-view main events that we've ever seen, and this would have topped it. I think now, even though we've waited as long as we have for Conor McGregor to return, I think it's going to make UFC 300 that much bigger. And once the card is officially announced, once the UFC decides to share the official poster, which I expect nothing less than just a masterful creation whenever that decides to release. Once that gets revealed, I think the countdown is really going to start, and I think people are going to get really excited because if you have Conor McGregor at the top of UFC 300, just imagine what a potential pay-per-view could look like, not just in terms of title fights, but high-level top 10 and top 5 contender fights that we've been waiting to see for over a year, and for some of them, I would assume 2 years. So I think even though we've been pretty pissed the last few months that we haven't gotten clarity on this, I think the stars could be potentially aligning to where UFC 300 is, going to live up to the hype as the UFC is hoping it will. You just hope and pray to the MMA gods, if they do somehow exist, that Conor McGregor potentially headlining UFC 300 does not come back to bite the UFC in the ass, because we remember what happened at UFC 200, and then eventually, and I'm sure you'd probably agree and confer with this, that UFC 202 was simply better than UFC 200 because you had Conor McGregor on it. So hopefully the UFC doesn't get into a situation where UFC 300 does not have Conor McGregor on it, and you put him on like UFC 301 or 302, and it ends up hurting UFC 300 in the long run. We obviously don't know that, but let's just hope the UFC strategically plays their cards right, because as we've alluded to before, it would be a waste of an Ultimate Fighter season if this fight doesn't ultimately materialize. And also to add one more thing, to hear Dana White say last week at the post-fight presser for Dana White Contender Series, in quotes, we'll see where he lands. What is that? What does that mean? Is he fighting Michael Chandler, or does he not? That's my question. You can't frame it that way unless you know something that somebody else doesn't. That's my reading that. I could be wrong, but when I heard that, I was very, very, very confused.
I mean, they have had the teases of that, maybe Michael Chandler will not be the opponent. And we have had the teases of when Conor was doing that big comeback and he was getting interviewed during I think it was the Anthony Joshua fights. And we did talk about he has a plan. He has Chandler, he has Gaethje BMF title, and he has the Nate Diaz trilogy fight. But in my opinion, as we kind of alluded to, it would be an absolute waste of a tough season if we did not get McGregor and Chandler in that cage at some point, and at some point soon. It should have been this year, like you said, but I guess UFC 300 is the next best thing. But if it's not going to be UFC 300 and it's not going to be Michael Chandler, then I don't know what it's going to be. I mean, are they hoping that Islam Makhachev defeats Charles Oliveira next week, and then they try to do Islam Makhachev versus Conor McGregor for the lightweight title at UFC 300? That fight would not make any sense to me, other than he's Khabib's student.
No, it wouldn't. But what it would do was it would create similar buzz and intrigue to what UFC 229 did, which would make, I'm almost darn sure positive, it would make the build-up just as dark, if not darker, than when Khabib fought Conor.
We actually, Zan, just passed the 5-year anniversary of UFC 229.
That's true.
So, I mean, I get it from, I guess, that sense, and that's maybe what Dana is looking at and why he's saying we'll see. But I would feel bad for Chandler then, not just for the fact that he'd be out of a money fight, a fight where he would be guaranteed to make, you know, there would probably be at least a million pay-per-view buys, but also in the fact that right now he's in limbo. If this Conor fight doesn't go, I mean, the whole division is not holding up. Oliveira and Makhachev are going to fight for the title next week. You had Gaethje and Poirier fighting a couple of months ago. The division, you have Fiziev and Gamrot, who just fighting. Gamrot's going to be the fill-in potentially for if something happens with the Makhachev and Oliveira fight. The division's going on, and right now he's just waiting.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm almost worried in the sense that if Chandler doesn't get this fight and he's stuck in such a limbo, he might have to consider other options, either in combat sports or consider semi-retiring, because it seems like that's the direction that the UFC is trying to push unless they give him this fight. Because who else realistically could he fight that isn't already have a fight or that he hasn't already fought? There's very few options. That's what that's what I'm trying to allude to. Yeah.
I know that there's not a lot of options for him as of this moment. Plus, I believe he is. I mean, you have to really consider that. Obviously, he's not going to get the next title shot, and I mean that loss to Poirier back at the last Madison Square Garden show basically took him out of that he still needs a couple of fights in order to get to somebody like Islam Makhachev. So I really this is a concern for me in terms of this is a concern for me. And it goes to what I said before, Zan. On the other end, if Conor McGregor does not come back for UFC 300 after all this time, then why are we going to continue to hold our breath and wait for him? Yeah, I was saying he's lost with Chandler. He's lost 3 of his last 4 fights. I needed to double check and make sure I had the numbers right. The only win he has in that span is Tony Ferguson, that brutal front kick knockout. And yeah, and you know my feelings about Tony Ferguson at this point, Stan. Regardless of the interview that he did very well, where he recognizes the state at where he's at, which I praise, I still think it's irresponsible the UFC to continue to push him out there. And Michael Chandler, like you said, the Conor McGregor right now is the biggest fight for him. And if that doesn't come to fruition, then I feel bad for Chandler. He would be in a no-win situation, and McGregor, look, I get he's the money draw, but like I said, if he's not coming back, like I said last week, if he's not coming back for UFC 300, what's the point in trying to bring him back at all?
For sure. So if you were to guess right now and you were to play matchmaker, do you think UFC 300 is going to be McGregor versus Chandler, or do you think the UFC goes in a different direction?
As of right now, I'm going to say it has to be McGregor and Chandler. Not for the fact that I think UFC 300 would be bad without Conor McGregor. If you remember, Zan, when we were criticizing UFC 290 for not having McGregor Chandler or not having John Jones versus Stipe Miocic, rather, and that ends up being one of the greatest cards in UFC history.
Right.
So I feel like UFC 300, it's not going to live or die because of McGregor or Chandler, but this whole McGregor Chandler saga and this whole saga of McGregor trying to make a return from when he broke his leg in the 3rd fight with Dustin Poirier, that's where it's going to live and die.
100%. So I guess my final follow-up thought is this. If you're the UFC at this point, you're just hoping and praying that Q1 of 2024 goes the way you hope it will, based on the schedule you have already built. Because if you don't have Conor McGregor on UFC 300, you need to really strategically think about, okay, what would be the biggest selling point if we don't have the biggest star the sport has ever seen? That's all I can really say. These next few months are going to be very telling to see what the UFC actually does with this fight, and if they even pursue this fight at all. It'll be very interesting, but I'm with you. I do think McGregor versus Chandler. It has to be on UFC 300, and if it is on UFC 300, it has to happen at some point in 2024. Because if it doesn't, then it'll never happen. So
And when you were talking about UFC 300 and alternate other fights that they could book around it, that's also not taken into consideration when about was it 32 days from today, when John Jones and Stipe Miocic enter Madison Square Garden for their heavyweight title fight. It could be the last time that we see one of those two, if not both of those guys, in a UFC octagon. So I'm just thinking of like potential other headlines. You got to make dates work at this point. But the only other name that I could think for UFC 300, and again, you think about dates and you think about the time frame of potential title fights, and he's may need one before UFC 300. But you got to think at this point, if there's no Conor and there's no John Jones, Sean O'Malley headlining UFC 300.
yeah, Sean O'Malley headlining UFC 300, or quite frankly, the UFC could throw a curveball and do Adesanya Strickland too as the headliner
Yeah, I guess that would work
UFC
too.
300. Yeah, considering Strickland's ties to Extreme Couture and Las Vegas and him being the champion, I think there would be a lot of Israel Adesanya fans that would travel into Vegas just to see that fight. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that's another alternative option, if you will. Or if you want, you could do the super fight. You could realistically make a Volk Islam rematch for UFC 300. If Volk, we assume that the fight's going to go through, but if Volk gets through Ilya Taporia, that fight could potentially make sense as well. You'd have to figure out what you do from an Abu Dhabi perspective. More than likely UFC 304 or 305, but that's another potential option too.
Right, and for those who are not aware, Ilya Taporia went on some television show supposedly and said that he and Alexander Volkanovski have verbally agreed to a featherweight title fight that would headline UFC 297, which would be the first title fight in the first UFC pay-per-view of 2024, targeted for January 20th. To TBD on where that fight would take place. I think we were thinking Toronto originally.
Mm-hmm.
So just being aware, just throwing it out there. So if you missed it, like as we say, in case you missed it, that's what's going on supposedly.
100%.
All right, let's move over now to the boxing world, Sam. We're gonna do a little update to this Fury Usyk story from last week. Now, nothing bad in that, the report is that, they had a disagreement or the money was something, and it's off. It's still on, supposedly. No update to the date yet. We don't know if it's December 23rd. We don't know if it's one of the weekend days in January. Um, but we talked about the potential, Zan, of a rematch clause, and surprise, surprise, not really a surprise. There is a two-way rematch clause. So whoever loses this fight, especially if it's Usyk who drops 3 championships in a loss, can activate a rematch. However, the IBF is stepping forward. Now, Zan, we have talked about the IBF, and I have praised the IBF for their no nonsense taking, I guess would be the best word for it when it comes to their championships.
Yep.
And they are saying that they are mandating a mandatory title defense for the winner. Here's where the issue lies in. No exception for a rematch. So even if the loser of Fury Usyk activates the title rematch, activates the title rematch, if the winner of Fury Usyk won goes with the rematch, they will be stripped of the IBF Heavyweight Championship. Now, Zan, this calls for this great banner. And the reason I am going to bring up this great banner here, Zan, that we bring out every week, even though this fight is not, dissolved, and this fight is still happening, and like I said, I've praised the IBF for this, but if you think back, Zan, uh, Vladimir Klitschko versus Tyson Fury. When Tyson Fury in 2015, it was November of 2015, pulled off the unbelievable upset won the 3 heavyweight championships that Vladimir Klitschko held. His reign with those 3 belts, man, lasted a whole 10 days because the
Yep.
IBF said, "Oh, you have to fight our mandatory challenger." Fury said, "No." Vladimir Klitschko activated the rematch clause, and Fury was going to grant it. Obviously, that never happened due to Tyson Fury's personal issues outside of the ring. But
Right.
the IBF said, "Okay, no, we're just taking it away." So that's where I have the problem, Stan. I respect the IBF and they have zero tolerance for BS, but I feel like an undisputed heavyweight championship, which we talked about, Sam, we haven't seen for about 20 years. That does not fall under BS, my part.
Oh, for sure. And I just feel like it's a blow to boxing because even though you have the 2 best heavyweights in the world, why would you not want to have all the marbles at stake? To me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And by the way, you mentioned Fury Klitschko, which is a classic heavyweight title fight. That's the fight that introduced me, considering that I'm like a newer boxing fan. That's the fight that introduced me to heavyweight championship boxing. So that just goes to tell you how long I followed Tyson Fury in his career. It's pretty easy to think about from a holistic perspective. So
That's nuts.
yeah.
But yeah, I feel like I said before, the undisputed heavyweight championship, that does not fall under BS. And Stan, you followed some of the lighter weight classes more than I do, but I don't really recall, the IBF being like this when it comes to other championships.
No, you don't see it in the later weight classes, and I honestly don't know the reason for it. Maybe it's because the fighters are more complacent and are more understanding to what the IBF wants. But you are correct in your assessment in saying that no, it does not happen far too often in the lighter weight classes, which might actually be a good thing because now you're seeing some of these bigger fights, like Tank and Ryan Garcia and like Spence and Crawford, and even quite frankly, Devin Haney and Vasily Lomachenko, fights that maybe wouldn't have happened 5 or 6 years ago because of what the IBF is doing is now happening because now the promoters are able to, lighten up and be a little bit more accommodating when it comes to, crossover fights and that sort of nature. So you are correct in saying that it does not happen far too often when you're lower than 265.
So the assumption would be that the mandatory challenger in this kind of situation would be Filip Hrgovic. And actually, a couple of days ago, Eddie Hearn told Boxing Media, I think this was reported, okay, at least the tweet that I have, or should I say the X that I have, it comes from Michael Benson, who says that Eddie Hearn has suggested that if the Fury Usyk rematch happens and the IBF heavyweight championship is vacated, Anthony Joshua could steer away from a potential winter bout with Deontay Wilder. We have talked about that. The plan for Fury and Wilder to finally take place in Saudi Arabia at some point this winter. If the IBF title is vacated, supposedly Joshua may steer away from that fight and potentially fight Hrgovic for a vacant IBF heavyweight championship.
Wait, Tom, do you mean Fury Wilder or Wilder Joshua?
I apologize, Joshua Wilder.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you, what would you rather see? Would you rather see Filip Hrgovic, or would you rather see what is supposed to occur? Because to be quite honest, I like Filip Hrgovic, but can he really capture the casual fan? I don't know. I don't know if he
That's
can.
and that's my problem. And that's my problem is that Filip Hrgovic, who is massively talented, has great power, but he is not a draw yet. We talk about Joshua and Wilder being past their prime a little bit, but they are draws. Fury is a draw. Zan, did I not last week? You tested me to showcase, how could I market Usyk about how Usyk can be a draw, and
I
I
did.
dare say that an undefeated versus undefeated heavyweight championship fight and then whatever happens afterward, whoever Fury or Usyk loses, trying to avenge, their one loss against the other.
Mhm.
That writes itself. That sells itself. Filip Hrgovic has not gotten to that point yet.
Nope. That's right. Yeah, yes, and until he fights one of those 4 guys that we just mentioned, it's going to be a while before he's known to the casual boxing audience as someone who is a can't miss, must see TV kind of fighter. So,
Absolutely. So what I will do, Zan,
and
is
what I do think, though, unfortunately, from Hrgovic's perspective, and I'm sure you would agree with this, it would be very similar to when Amanda Nunes fought Ronda Rousey, and all the promotion went to Ronda Rousey because she was the bigger superstar. I guarantee you, if one of those 4 names fights Hrgovic, one of the 4 names that we've just mentioned in this 5-minute segment, I guarantee you Hrgovic will get none of the shine simply because that's how the boxing game works, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Zan, his 2 most recent opponents, Hrgovic, are his best fights, and that's Zalei Zhang and Dempsey McKean, which, those are talented fighters, but they're not, not a Joe Joyce or a Daniel Dubois even.
Right, and you could argue McKean was the more high octane fight. Would you not? Would you not agree with that?
Correct, that was the octane fight. I mean, the high octane fight, but McKean, if we're thinking about, I know ESPN always used to have the graphic of the champions, the top challengers, and then the prospects that are up and coming, and that's where you would see, when I remember seeing these graphics, the Joe Joyces and the Daniel Dubois and such, you know, McKean is not even on the Joyce and Dubois level.
No, he isn't.
So
Unfortunately,
you were expecting Hrgovic off of that to go and fight Oleksandr Usyk or potentially Tyson Fury for a heavyweight championship, or even a Anthony Joshua vacant title fight. That smells like trouble. The only reason, San, I could see that being somewhat good is if Joshua wins, and then you set up a trilogy fight between a Joshua and Usyk for an undisputed heavyweight title, or a long-awaited, albeit as we typically say with these boxing, big boxing fights, years past when it should have happened, Joshua versus Fury fight.
but Tom, who wants to see Joshua versus Usyk again?
I don't, but I'm saying the potential is there.
I know, and of course, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to put it in the UK. They're going to try to give Anthony Joshua the home field advantage, and simply because Usyk is the better boxer, he'll probably end up outboxing Anthony Joshua again, just like he did in the past. And it'll probably be just one of those wasted fights where we're going to have to play the circus game all over again. It's gonna be the same thing over and over and over again. And it's almost like these federations listen to our show because they do exactly the opposite of everything that we say every single week. So,
Dan, did you say circus?
I did.
I feel like the circus music that we have on ETV and Football Friday deserves to be here for this. Boxing gets in its own way. And actually, you know what? In respect to you, because you have now joined us on Football Friday, here you go. Broncos country, let's ride. Boxing country, let's ride.
Yeah, no kidding. It's hilarious. Right. Now, wait, Tom, realistically, though, given that this is a possibility, what do you actually think really happens with the heavyweight division? Because right now, given what the IBF has claimed and what they're trying to do, it seems like the heavyweight division went from being clear cut, we know who's going to fight who, to complete chaos in a matter of a couple of days.
This is why, Zan, this is why I threw that question out there last week of like, am I right to actually have hope? And the answer right now, based on what the IBF just did, is no.
No. So that means all of the fights that we're looking forward to at the end of the year, when it comes to the boxing portion of combat sports, you kind of have to hold your breath, because if you don't, one day you could wake up and find out that one of those fights you were looking forward to was 100% canceled for no reason or another, except a contract dispute or one of these federations ruining the fight. This is why so many people are leaving the sport and refusing to follow it, because the best don't fight the best, and they're supposed to, unlike MMA. And yeah, MMA gets a ton of a ton of flack for it too. But at the very least, you don't see the UFC coming out and saying, "Oh, we need a mandatory challenger for the UFC middleweight title because of this, and this." You don't see that in MMA. You see it in boxing for whatever reason, and I think that's why it's set the sport back so many years because they simply can't listen to the consumer. And speaking of consumerism, we're going to talk about the direction that boxing is going in just a second. But this story is crazier than I think people might even realize.
Yeah, no, it's all politics, politics, and politics. And San, the other thing, there is actually one goodish thing that it does set up, but San, I think this is once again that nuclear button of in worst case of scenario hit this button. Do you think this is also out there potentially because of Zan that little I threw the grenade last week and so did Ariel Helwani, and I'll do it again. They're putting a backup plan in just in case Francis Ngannou somehow wins against Tyson Fury.
Yeah, unfortunately, and I mean, if
Yes,
you
because
saw,
oh, sorry, you were explaining because I was going to say because think about it, if you're Usyk and Ngannou somehow pulls off the biggest upset ever and beats Tyson Fury, this fight is kind of damaged, and then you're going to say, okay, I'll just defend my title against Turgovich.
okay, well, I'm not even going to ask the question I was going to ask. Wait, did you just say that Francis Ngannou knocking out Tyson Fury would be the biggest upset ever? So are you trying to tell me that it would be bigger than Buster Douglas knocking out Mike Tyson?
Okay, not that far, not that
Oh,
far.
okay,
Not
okay.
that far. I'm over exaggerating. I want to make a point here that if Usyk watches Tyson Fury get beat by Francis Ngannou, is he going to basically turn around and not want this fight and instead get a mandatory challenger out of the way?
It's a good and in time to make your blood boil a little bit more. I just looked the other day and it doesn't seem like tickets are officially on sale just yet, which is really unfortunate because we only have 3 weeks until the fight.
Wait, for Fury versus Ngannou?
That's correct. because they
Why?
didn't, because they didn't have a venue until like 2 days ago.
Hold on. I mean, are they trying to, no disrespect to my guys, but are they trying to PFL this where it's a made for TV broadcast and emphasizing the television or pay-per-view portion of it and not the live attendance?
It could very well be that.
I mean, and I say that granted and with grain of salt because as far as I know, the only PFL-ness that's part of this fight is just Francis Ngannou.
Right.
As far as I was concerned, the production, the pay-per-viewing and everything, that would be Tyson
Top
Fury
rank.
and his promoters, right? And Top Rank
Right.
and who's the other co-promoter? Isn't it
Frank
like
Warren. Frank Warren.
Frank Warren, right? That's
Mhm.
what I thought it was gonna be Warren and Top Rank and ESPN Plus and all of them, not PFL. Granted, PFL was part of ESPN.
Right. Yeah, I just saw that the other day because I was curious to know like what ticket prices were, and I could not find a definitive number. So I honestly don't know what's going on. All I know is that it's taking place in Saudi Arabia and it's taking place at some sort of stadium that no one's ever heard of, and that's all I know. And I feel like it'll be one of those situations where it'll feel like Fight Island, where the only people that will actually be physically in attendance are people that actually live in the country. Unfortunately,
All right,
and
let's get to another.
of course they're gonna be they're gonna be charging $85 back stateside because of course they are. So
All right, so actually, you know what? I'm gonna change plans. Let's not go into one of the other promoters and cable channels we'll be talking about. Let's stick with ESPN, and since we just brought them up in conversation, let's talk about this right now. ESPN Plus. So we've talked about San about ESPN Plus raising its prices We even had a little exclusive because of some, well, unintentional digging that you did.
from
And
your
now it is
yeah,
official. We've talked about it.
just
ESPN Plus is going to increase its pricing to the most it's ever been. I think it's $109.99 per year, so about $110 per year. And I think if you're paying by the month, it's $11 or 10.99 per month.
10.99.
Yeah, so that will go into effect next month, November 10th, 1 month from today. And Zan, the low blow to all of it is that 1 month from today marks it would be 1 day shy of UFC 295, where we're gonna have the big John Jones, Stipe Miocic heavyweight title fight, and then co-main eventing the vacant light heavyweight title fight between Yuri and Pereira.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, you and I are both ESPN Plus subscribers, and we both religiously use the service because we have to for our combat sports needs.
Right.
And to the American public, to me, this is just a slap in the face. Now you're asking people to pay $110 per year for, quite frankly, a ton of combat sports, select college basketball, and select college football for content that you may only watch 20% of. To to me, this is just a loss for everyone involved. Now you're asking people to not only pay up front $110 a year, but then you got to pay on top of that $85 just to watch UFC 295 and every UFC pay per view after that. It's like, when is this saga going to end? And it feels like it never does.
And I don't feel like it's ever going to. And Zan, heaven forbid, I fear what, well, we fear is going to happen come that UFC 296 or UFC 297 card, end of this year, start of next, where they choose to raise the pay per view prices again to $85. And Zan, I've talked about this, I get it. And we'll talk about it next when it comes to another service provider. Everything is turning to the streaming. I get it, but it feels like everyone is just trying to reinvent the wheel,
I agree.
and they're talking about, oh, the good thing about streaming is it's all a la carte. It's just what I want. But
No, it is, but
when you're
no, it
looking at the pricing of everything, it's like you're going to be paying just as much as you did with cable for whatever, you're gonna get, plus all the pay-per-views on top of that. I mean, San, I have said it before on this show, I've said it before on ETB, and I'll say it again, you know, laugh at me and laugh at everybody all you want for promoting, in this case, Peacock, but before they integrated with Peacock, the WWE Network. But Vince McMahon and company got it right, where you should not be charging a premium for the service. It should be whatever the service price is, and then maybe a small premium, if any, or you just make it the base price, subscription price, a little more, but then your customers are not paying extra for, in the WWE's case, the premium live events, or in this case with the UFC, the pay-per-views and such.
right. And you go back to your great point about a la carte. Tom, if it's a la carte, if I'm an ESPN Plus subscriber and I just want to watch combat sports, why can't I buy a singular package where it's just combat sports on ESPN Plus? And that's all I get. Because if it was up to me and I could have my own TV viewing experience, I would only watch 30 channels, to be honest with you, and maybe 2 streaming services, and that's it. If it was up to me.
And it's ridiculous. And you consider the economic times that we live in, Zan. I don't want to get into politics or economics on this show, but, and I've talked about this before. I've talked about it with UFC 295, in fact, at Madison Square Garden with the ticket prices. You are hurting. I know Nick Borgeson likes to talk about me as, like, you're damaging, media with how much they gotta pay. I just think, Zan, it's not just me, the customers. You are damaging the middle class and poor customers who are trying to get into the combat sports experience, let alone just the sports experience, period. It's like, you know, I can't think of I guess it would be financial gatekeeping, essentially.
Well, no, and you're also hurting the people too, not just the middle class and poor people, but you're hurting the people that work all week because they're excited to save their money to buy a fight, or buy another event where that's going to be their biggest expense of the entire week, and they have to essentially budget for it, and they can't do what they used to do, and that's unfortunate. But I guess on the positive side of things, and yeah, there actually shockingly is a positive, and I'm going to tell you what it is. The positive is the bar business. Now, when you look at bars, they don't have to pay for streaming services. They can literally just pay for direct TV for business, bring everybody in without a cover charge, and air the it's that way because they have direct TV and they don't need that second middleman by getting 4 different streaming services to stream sports. They can just get it directly through their boxes because of their business deal. So actually, even though the prices are going up, it could actually help the movie theater business and the bar business as the people want to try to get out of their houses to watch these events.
I will definitely agree on that, Sam, and I hope that maybe, at some point in 2024, when inevitably all the prices jack up, I will do the bar or restaurant or I guess in my case, because I have it one near me, the Buffalo Wild Wings kind of experience of watching, stuff there. But
Which
you
is
know,
fun. But
right.
I've done it on several occasions, and it's definitely a different experience watching fights with people you've never met before. Those 4 hours, you have a common ground, and you like what's on the TV. It's definitely a very different experience.
It definitely is. It would just be a matter of, some things, that I would do would have to change. I wouldn't be able to really do fight recaps because I'd have to, go somewhere else to watch the fight and not, have potentially have the internet service and such. And
Right.
then there's also the idea of, if I'm not going to go out, then there are just some things that are going to have to be cut. I'll be quite clear. I wasn't excited for it already, but this weekend's fun pay-per-view with Paul and Danis, KSI and Fury. I mean, I'm not interested anyway, but just the $50 or $55 price tag on top of that. I've said so, and I've warned that some things are going to get cut, and that's going to be one I'm not going to purchase because I need to, make a little more responsible purchases, especially when we have 294 next week. We're gonna have 295, like you said, the day after the ESPN price increase. Plus, you got Fury and Ngannou coming up.
Yeah, which is literally almost a week after UFC 294. And what I was going to say to conclude that is, I think it's hilarious, in my opinion, that DAZN, they've had their problems this year.
Oh, Zen.
Go ahead,
If
go
I'm
ahead.
gonna start, sorry, but if I'm gonna start canceling subscriptions, then I have to start making drastic. The zone's gonna be the first to go.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I think I've been very transparent on the show. I canceled it back in April when there were all those issues with Garcia and Davis. I'm like, I'm not dealing with this. But anyway, what I was going to say was, I think it's hilarious that in the United States, ESPN Plus and DAZN customers are getting priced out. But if you go across the pond to the UK and Ireland, they're getting everything included with the subscription. Overseas, it's
Maybe
unbelievable.
maybe it has something to do with how we are here in America, but I just don't know. It's ridiculous. And Zan, this is why you're seeing everybody turn to VPNs.
Oh, this is another heads up. You're not going to believe this. In the country of Georgia, you won't believe this one. For $40 a year, they get every single UFC event, fight night, pay per view, everything with commercials. $40, one flat rate for the entire year, every single UFC event. If only we could have nicer things, Tom. If only we could have nicer things.
Unfortunately, Zan. Unfortunately, we can't.
No, unfortunately, we can't. And speaking of streaming services, the other major combat sport, boxing, is going to be undergoing a bit of a change too. So, in case you guys didn't know, there's been this whole war between Dana White and Steven Espinosa. Again, it has now come out that Showtime is not going to be renewing its Premier Boxing Champions contract next year, and it looks like Amazon Prime is in the mix as a potential new home for the PBC and for a promotion that I actually have quite a lot of respect for, considering the quality of fight continues to get better and better. For someone who is an Amazon Prime member and subscriber, full exposure for myself due to Thursday Night Football. This is a brilliant move because now everything will be streamlined on Amazon. And I get combat sports and I also get football. I think this is a potential win-win for everybody involved at Amazon. Tom, considering that I only watch Showtime for combat sports, and considering that Showtime is more than likely going to be going away from Bellator once Bellator is eventually sold, and it looks like they're going to be going away from boxing altogether. What do you think of this move? I think this is a brilliant move. I think this is a move that has needed to happen for quite a bit. And we were talking off the air, holistically and logistically, this is the only home for Premier Boxing Champions that makes sense, considering that Top Rank is ESPN and Matchroom, of course, is DAZN. So, Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, so I guess in the streaming game kind of makes sense. And I know we were talking, Zan, about, good and bad to everything, but it's just really, as you said in our pre-show discussion, the nature of everything. Everything is going to streaming. So I do feel bad for those long, boxing followers who, have been watching things like HBO and Showtime for a while and now have to adjust to even more to the streaming age because unfortunately older audiences just struggle when it comes to technology. But yeah, it makes sense in terms of streaming home because as you said, ESPN Plus and DAZN are already booked with their own boxing. I am an Amazon Prime subscriber too, so I definitely will tune into PBC cards on Amazon Prime. Um, I think it's just Zan. What catches my eye more is just think about it, Zan. 5 years ago, we were all aghast. We were all jaw dropped that HBO was backing out of the boxing game. It was just 5 years ago where we still were enjoying both HBO and Showtime boxing. And
That's
now Showtime is pulling out of it. And then, as you said, once Bellator gets, either it has its merger with the PFL approved or it ends up, or the merger falls through and it collapses in upon itself if Adkins' report is right. I think that's what's catching my eye more, Zan. It's the end of an era. HBO and Showtime boxing were just the you know what in the 80s and the 90s, and now it's over.
Yeah, not only is it over, that also means I don't know if you thought it like I don't know if you thought of it like this either, but that means that boxing will only have one cable home in the entire US, and that'll be Top Rank Boxing on ESPN. That's
Yeah,
pretty wild to think about. If you would have told me 5 years ago, oh, that was a possibility, I don't think I would have believed it for a second. I would have been
and
I would have been I'm like, wait, HBO is done with the sport of boxing? That
I
doesn't
mean,
make sense.
it's nuts, like Zan, but it goes to show, the direction that media has gone in because I mean, even the UFC since 2019, it's been all ESPN and Plus. Well, that news got announced in late 2018 as well, so you can actually say since late 2018, everything with combat sports has been streaming services, and I guess it's just combat sports going in the direction of what's cool and what's mainstream.
Yeah, and even though we're not really on this topic anymore, it's unfortunate to think that just 2.5 years ago, DAZN was trying to be the service that eliminated pay-per-view altogether, and and they quickly realized they had to get back into pay-per-view because they weren't selling enough subscribers. So I think it'll
And and unfortunately, Zan, that's the model that seems to have won, is the one that we were just complaining about, the subscription price plus the pay-per-view prices.
Yeah, and it'll just be interesting to see what promotion, if any of them, will do what the WWE Network decided to do when they went the Peacock route. I don't know if any MMA promotion will do that. I guess the closest one that you could say that does do that pretty well is One Championship, considering that every single event is on Amazon
On
Prime,
Amazon Prime, right?
and you don't have to pay the extra arm and a leg to watch whether it's One Championship or one Friday fight nights or whatever they call it these days. My point being that if you're not in the streaming game a little bit, you have to start in order to continue to be a combat sports fan because unfortunately or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, that's where it's going. So
For sure. It's unfortunate, but that's, as you said, the nature of the beast.
well, for sure. So do you think then, Tom, that that Top Rank will eventually move off of ESPN and strictly onto ESPN Plus? Is that gonna happen?
Well, it depends, Sam. Remember what I told you a couple of weeks ago? There are these reports that ESPN might ditch cable altogether, and the ESPN Plus platform would become ESPN.
Or could you see a scenario where ESPN is purchased by Apple and you'll see Top Rank Boxing on Apple? Could you
I
see?
don't want to. I don't want to imagine those reports coming true. Apple purchasing ESPN. I don't want to imagine that
How come?
because that would mean another thing I would have to subscribe to.
Yeah, either another thing or I guess another Apple TV or another Apple device that you would have to purchase.
Yeah, and Zen, I am not the biggest fan of. I've had the free trials where I would watch. Uh, the Friday night baseball, like whenever the Yankees were on it, and because they're my
Right.
local team, and I'm not a fan of the broadcast style.
No, no, the broadcasts aren't good, and I guess from that perspective, it would also worry me too. Like, would they hire a new broadcasters just for the Apple broadcast, or would they bring in the talent that we've all known to love? And I worry that they wouldn't do it because money's going to trump everything, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. All I can say as a final footnote to this topic is if you're not already familiar with the streaming game in combat sports, try to freshen up as quickly as you can because that's where everything is going. And if you want to continue to follow combat sports, that's really unfortunately in this country the only way you're going to be able to do that. Unless you really want to go the VPN route, or unless you really want to move outside of the United States, that's the only way. So
Yeah. Uh, Hey, more positive stuff. Did you see? I know we didn't put the. I didn't know. I know we didn't have a graphic for the Wood Warrington fight. Did you see that massive knockout?
I did. I did.
That
You
was.
want to talk about something positive DAZN did over the weekend? I guess you could say that fight over delivered.
Oh my god,
did it
that
not?
was fantastic. It's unfortunate it didn't get marketed as much as the UFC Vegas 80 or Bellator 300, but just the knockout alone, and the social media rounds that knockout's getting, I guess makes up for it somewhat.
Oh, for sure. And I guess maybe it sucks the crazy people back into resubscribing to DAZN if you've already canceled it because DAZN is going to be used this weekend for another, I guess you want to call it Misfit Celebrity Boxing card, which we'll see Logan Paul finally compete against Dillon Danis and KSI finally Tommy Fury. As Tom, you have already said it, you are not going to be watching this event, but
Hell no.
in your opinion, are are these fights going to be flops? Is there going to be any funny business in either of these two fights? Is it anything weird going to happen in either of these two fights? What do you realistically see in both of these fights that people should be expecting?
My hope, Zan, is this fight flops as hard as Ric Flair does in the ring.
And
Because
who are you picking in both fights? I'm going with Logan Paul and Tommy Fury as they should win, but I don't know. What do you think?
can I just predict for the ring to explode before any fights happen?
Oh wow, that's harsh.
No, I don't know, Zan. First of all, I don't know how you can't pick Logan Paul when Dillon Danis hasn't fought in any combat sports since 2019.
Tom, do you realistically think this fight is actually going to happen on Saturday, or
I didn't think it was going to because of all the drama and all the litigation. And I'm still holding my breath that maybe this fight actually isn't going to happen because of all this stupid litigation. But
could
it,
you could,
it
could
hasn't.
you could you imagine if this fight gets canceled on Friday night?
I just that would be ridiculous. It wouldn't be it wouldn't surprise me, but it would be absolutely ridiculous, especially when you consider Zan. Didn't Dillon Danis go from like 330,000 like followers to like a million in a short time because of this fight?
Yep, you did.
So, I mean, it would be utterly ridiculous. I'm certain. I'm sure certain people would be happy, but it would be ridiculous if it gets canceled the night before. And I don't know if the night before is going to be, it's not going to be enough time to get, because I know Logan said that there was a replacement opponent on hand.
Yeah, and I don't know who that replacement opponent is.
I think it was the guy, his name slips my mind, Sam. He was supposed to fight Logan. I think it was supposed to be at the Garden, and it got canceled the week of because of weight issues.
Oh, that's right. And now I can't think of who it is. That's right. You're onto something there.
And as far as the main event goes, I'll look up the guy's name in just a second.
Okay.
As far as the KSI Fury fight goes, I'm with you. It would have to be Tommy Fury in my mind. Not that KSI is bad or anything like that, but that Tommy Fury is the legitimate boxer. And he, if I'm not mistaken, has a win over one of the Pauls in Jake Paul. So I would
That's right.
assume that Tommy Fury, also by blood related to the, heavyweight champion of the world, who's going to be fighting for an undisputed title in Tyson Fury. So I got to go with Tommy in this one.
Yeah, is that an 8-round fight from what I remember?
I want to say it is an 8-round fight.
Yeah, because I was gonna pick Tommy Fury to win in 4, to win to win by knockout. It's not gonna be close. I think.
Actually,
Go ahead.
Actually, I think I might be mistaken. The fight that I was thinking about, I think that was that was Hasim Rahman Jr. That was Jake Paul's fight, not Tommy Fury. But I do remember Logan bringing Hasim Rahman's name up, if I remember correctly.
That's right. Anyway, as I was saying, I think KSI is gonna run the whole fight, and I think Fury's gonna catch him with something. What do you think?
I think KSI will do a lot of, moving around the ring, but I think Tommy Fury will cut the ring off at certain points. I don't know if it's going to be a finish, but I think it'll just drag to a one-sided decision. And I think the Paul Danis fight's also going to drag to a one-sided decision in Paul's favor.
Okay, so you're picking both of these to go the distance. I'm picking Paul versus Danis to go the distance, but I would have a little bit more fun with Fury and KSI and say that this ends in some sort of a finish. So, by the way, over under 100,000 TV pay-per-view buys for this event. What do you think? Because you can buy it on your cable operator. I just checked the other day. You don't have to exclusively stream it. You can and buy
I could
it.
see it. As much as I'm not the biggest fan of these guys, I could see it being over just because of the appeal to everything. Paul Danis on social media has been going nuts. Paul, obviously, crossover mainstream star. KSI, crossover mainstream star. Tommy Fury had the win over Jake Paul previously. I could see it.
Even though it's during the day in the United States, you can still see it.
Yes,
Okay.
I could definitely see. Let's move on, by the way, to the other card that takes place this weekend, UFC Vegas 81.
The
Sadiq
real
Youssef,
main event, to be
yeah,
quite
the real main event in the Apex, Sadiq Youssef versus Edson Barboza.
yeah, this is a high action fight, a potential fight of the night candidate, a potential best fight at the UFC Apex in 2023. If we want to give it that award, I know that it's not really an award. I just made it up on the spot, but I think Edson Barboza's experience is going to trump Sadiq Youssef, and I actually think Edson Barboza gets it done with a body kick in the third round and finishes Youssef in what will be a very, very action-packed back and forth striking fest where the first person to fall is going to be the first person to lose. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is going to be an absolute striking fest. I mean, his Sadiq Youssef's biggest wins so far, Zan, Alex Caceres, and Andre Fili. I guess you can go with Shaman Moraes if you want to, but he's fought Arnold Allen. That didn't go his way. I think you're right. I think Edson Barboza just has too much experience. I think this will be a fun brawl, potential fight at night, but I think Barboza is going to catch him with something around the third round or so. I'm going to go Barboza TKO in the third.
Okay, so we're both in unison on that. So don't forget UFC Vegas 81 is this weekend. And Tom, if I remember correctly, this is exclusive to ESPN Plus. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Let's briefly, Zan, talk about some of the action as we're getting ready to close out here that happened this past weekend. Obviously, Bellator 300 took place, and Zan, I mean, before we get into the fights, just bad, really disappointing.
Yeah, this was disappointing on so many levels, considering how highly anticipated Bellator 300 was. And when you see half of the comments and several Instagram posts, either of people that were at the event or just on the Bellator Instagram page themselves, and I'm not trying to rip the promotion here, they're only doing the best that they possibly can, and I know that firsthand because I've been to several events now. To see the majority of Instagram comments that I've seen say that Bellator didn't promote this event or Bellator 300 was just okay is a real concern, considering that Bellator does consider themselves the number 2 promotion in the world. And it seems to me like there's a clear gap between number 1 and number 2. Tom, did you see some similar feelings from the fans? And what were your overall thoughts on the way Bellator 300 was promoted as a whole? What do you think?
I did see some concerns, and Bellator, I mean, they promoted it a little more than they normally promote other Bellators, and for good reason because you had a bunch of title fights going in. I mean, it didn't help that earlier in the week you lost Bader Vassell too because of illness, and then Ilima-Lei McFarlane. But that's not on them. That's
No,
on Ilima-Lei McFarlane. How can you have 3 attempts to make weight, miss all 3 times, and in between your second and third, it go up in weight? Like, it makes no sense to me, but that's on Ilima-Lei.
yeah, and from a professionalism standpoint, that's the last thing you want to do heading into a title fight, which could honestly be a career tarnisher if it isn't already.
Yeah, absolutely, but in terms of marketing, Zan, I mean, that's just been a problem that's plagued Bellator throughout, at the very least, Zan, I would say, since the DAZN era, where they just have
Yeah,
not marketed themselves well.
same. You could even go back to the CBS Sports Network era too, where
Well, the DAZN was before that. They went to DAZN, I think, late 18 or early 19.
oh, that's right. Yeah, you could even go back to the Spike TV era and say the same thing too.
Yeah, so it has unfortunately been a big disappointment with Bellator, and it's times like these that I'm kind of not surprised that the PFL is supposedly swooping in.
Yeah, for sure. About the fights though, what did you think of Usman Nurmagomedov's performance? It didn't really seem like Brett Primus was able to get off first and do much of anything. Do you think realistically, if he's not the best lightweight in the world, do you think Usman Nurmagomedov is the clear number 2 best lightweight in all of MMA? What did you think of his performance?
Okay, first of all, and it's not of his fault. It's not of Usman Nurmagomedov's fault, but that fight, Sam. If I have any troubles trying to go to sleep when it comes to dealing with work and such, I'll just turn that fight on because it was, in my opinion, pretty boring. Not on his fault, though.
Right,
I think
because he did
Brent
pretty
Primus was just outclassed.
right, because Usman Nurmagomedov did what Usman Nurmagomedov does, and his fighting style isn't the most entertaining, but that's what you're going to get sometimes.
Right, and I think San, and this is, I guess, another problem with Bellator, and no disrespect to Brent Primus, but I think Brent Primus got that win at Madison Square Garden against Chandler to win the lightweight title, and ever since then, Bellator has been pushing him as one of their top lightweights, and I mean, by stretch, he kind of is, but he's not a main event player, if you know what I mean.
No, no, he isn't. If you don't have Usman Nurmagomedov on the other side, I can almost guarantee you that Brett and Primus would have not have been a main event against any other lightweight in
Oh,
that
Zan,
division.
Zan, if this was not a lightweight Grand Prix fight, then I would have said Cyborg versus Cat needed to main event if Bader versus Vassell was off.
Right, exactly.
Because this is not, and you could still have debated that Bader Vassell before that fight ended up getting scrapped, or in our case, in the reality that Kat Zingano challenging Chris Cyborg still should have main evented.
For sure. So I guess Usman Nurmagomedov won, so it looks like we're gonna wait and see who he fights in
Like I said last week, Zan, I think it's gonna Usman wins this, which he did. I
right.
think it's gonna be Usman versus Patricky in the finals, and Usman's gonna run all over him.
You think so?
I think so. I think this tournament is far and away Usman's to lose.
And do you think Patricky versus Sheepley is going to be competitive, or do You think just an early prediction? We're now like over a month out from the
Competitive, Zan, but I think regardless of who comes out of that fight on top, I think Usman Nurmagomedov's just on another level.
I think so too. So I guess the follow up to that would be: could you see a scenario where somehow the UFC scoops him up, just considering how talented he is?
Considering how talented he is, considering the Nurmagomedov name, oh, absolutely, they scoop him up.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
But,
And if somehow they don't, and a PFL Bellator merger happens, PFL will scoop him up too.
yeah, and they're gonna market him as one of their biggest stars, which would actually help. Which would actually help the PFL in the long run, considering they need more stars.
Zan, I could totally see a scenario where Usman wins this tournament, goes over to the PFL and fights in their lightweight season 1 year, wins that, and then either becomes a pay-per-view super fight star or goes over to the UFC and becomes a star over there.
Very close. And so the next few years could be the Usman Nurmagomedov era. And for those who have not seen him fight, he is one dominant player in that 155 division and someone who you just simply don't mess with at all. So,
No.
yeah.
All right. Speaking of, let's talk about the other fights. Chris Cyborg. It wasn't much of a fight. Cyborg just completely, anytime Zingano tried to get something going, Cyborg had the power, the counter shots to just shut her down. And then one of them just proved to end up being too much. It was an easy first round finish.
For sure. So are you ready to say that Chris Cyborg is the greatest female fighter ever, or are you still taking Amanda Nunes?
I still say Amanda Nunes, but with Nunes out of the picture, Cyborg is number 1 pound for pound right now.
For sure. So do you think this Kayla Harrison fight is a possibility now again, or no?
If the merger talks are true, if the merger talks end up going to fruition, absolutely, it's still a possibility.
Okay. But yeah, this fight certainly was a very easy
Although Zan, she did kind of tease retirement a little bit. So Sarah McCann,
I thought she was going to fight Leah McCourt next.
She is going to fight Leah McCourt next. But if you heard her comments in the post fight, she also mentioned having a last fight over in Japan, which could that Leah McCourt fight end up being? Which I don't know if that's going to be if Bellator ends up going either if Bellator goes under or if they go under PFL control.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. If you were to guess, what do you think is more likely?
I would think the Cyborg Harrison fight would be a better, the Cyborg Harrison fight regardless has to happen considering the circumstances with those two.
Cyborg Harrison in PFL or Cyborg Harrison in this new version of Bellator? What do you think?
Again, I guess that depends on how they're going to do the contracts with everything and how PFL is going to run Bellator.
Good point.
But I guess I would say maybe PFL because they would be the parent company and Harrison is PFL. But remember, Bellator is also more open to the interpromotional idea than, say, the UFC. Although PFL, Bellator, if they're under the same umbrella, is it really interpromotional?
Good point. So I guess no matter what happens, whoever the Cyborg fights next, it's going to be a big deal because you'll either have the retirement fight with McCourt or you'll have the highly anticipated grudge match between she and Kayla Harrison. So
yeah. All right. Also, Liz Carmouche, speaking of, we talked about Ilima-Lei McFarland. So what they did was the other time that happened with Carmouche, in that she has no challenger to take the title from her, but if she lost, the title would have been vacant, which it still baffles me rather than just doing the 3-round non-title fight, but doesn't matter. Carmouche ends up winning the fight in the 5th round, just completely injures McFarland's leg. But yeah, it still baffles me that Bellator went in that direction.
Yeah, same here, and it just wasn't the greatest fight ever. So to see it end, I think that was kind of fitting considering what happened earlier in the week. So
yeah, but yeah, that's why I say Bellator this wasn't a good card, and those were the only 3 fights because they were all title fights on the main card at least.
That's right. I guess a positive is that they did do the Pride style entrances at the beginning of the Showtime broadcast, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah,
And
no,
the
it
and
absolutely
the
was.
and the gloves too were very cool.
Yeah. At least they didn't have the golden mat like the UFC did for 200.
Yeah, thank goodness, right?
Speaking of the UFC, one last thing here. Probably the fight that topped all three of those fights. How the hell did Bobby Green knock out Grant Dawson in 33 seconds? It still baffles me.
Because MMA gonna MMA, that's why.
And Bobby Green, I told you this before the show, Zan. I mean, Bobby Green, veteran talent, great talent, fun guy, you know, but Grant Dawson, who was on a massive winning streak, was unbeaten in the UFC. I think his only loss came before the UFC. Just, considering the talent and the track that he was on, still a bad loss for Grant Dawson.
Yeah, definitely a bad loss to someone that was definitely further down in his competition, but I guess, well, Bobby Green still wants to remain a player, as a contender in the UFC, well, that's one of those wins where you beat a young up and comer and kind of see, what happens in the future. I think if Bobby Green can take advantage of this momentum, 2024 could be a big year for him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. That's going to do it for us then. Next week for episode 57, it's all about UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, we've been looking forward to this rematch for a year, and we almost hear Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira Act 2 for the UFC lightweight title in the same building in which Islam Makhachev became the new UFC lightweight champion. So it should be a lot of fun to preview that and so much more on the MMA Outsiders. Before we get out of here, make sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network across social media at ETB Network. Follow the MMA Outsiders across social media at MMA Outsiders ETB. Again, reintroducing myself. My name is Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer for BeachAPen.com and the newest writer for the team over at MMA Knockout, and of course, a member of the Bellator rankings panel. And then, of course, that's Tom Albano to my left. You can find his work over at Fansided MMA, and of course, all the fantastic fight recap work that he does over at the PFL website. So that's going to do it for another edition of the MMA Outsiders. Enjoy the fights. B. Joe Piper, who picked up a massive win over the weekend. And of course, we just want to remind you one last time that the next several months are going to be very, very big in the combat sports world. So stay tuned for all the exciting stuff that we have coming up and so much more. We could not do any of this without you. So again, a major thank you goes out to all of our listeners, all of our viewers, and all of our subscribers that watch this show religiously because we love doing it and we really could not do it without all of you. So thank you again for tuning in.
Thanks to all of you. For Zan, I'm Tom. We'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Take care.